This is a tutorial and a rant about the new counteroffer. We're looking at the seller counteroffer that was revised June of 2023. I'll explain how to fill it out, and then I'll talk about this section, section 1, which is the problem area on this form. So we start by putting the date that we draft the form in the top right. By default, this is a counter to the purchase agreement, so we don't need to check anything. You put the date of the purchase agreement here, property address, and the names of the parties. So pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Now, this is where we get into the troubled territory. And now just look at this form. I honestly cannot stand this thing because it is just full of text. So a counteroffer should be lines like this. What terms are you countering from the RPA? That's it. What part of the RPA do you disagree with? Write it out. That's it. But instead, you have all these paragraphs that have created so much confusion, and it's very frustrating as a broker because as I read this, there's really no point. Yes, I repeat it to the person that drafted this form, there's no point to have this in here. So let me briefly cover what these paragraphs are all about. 1A refers to the liquidated damages and arbitration clause in the RPA, and it says, surprise, if both parties didn't initial it, it doesn't become part of the agreement. Who would have thought? And then it basically says, but of course that can change in 1D in the other terms. Yeah, well, of course. Why are you putting this in here? Now, 1B, so this basically states because when the RPA changed December of last year, or of 2022, when the RPA changed, it put percentages in addition to fixed dollar amounts. So they're trying to patch up the problem it created by not just leaving it as a certain dollar amount or a certain percentage, because now that there's both in there and it calculates percentages automatically, they need to show that those move proportionally, okay? So they created a problem in the RPA, and then they're creating more verbiage here to clean up that problem, okay? And then 1C, so these are annoying and cumbersome, but they're tolerable because why not? And they don't take up that much space. Now just stop there. That's it. Stop. And then put a bunch of lines, like fill from here to here full of lines. But no, they can't. They put in this god awful paragraph right here that basically says that if let me ask you a question. How many buyers out there do you think are putting their appraisal contingency less than the sales price, than the purchase price in the RPA? I mean, what percentage? Probably very few, right? I mean, I know that people were acting crazy in the last few years of real estate and they're waiving the appraisal contingency and stuff. But how often do you think a buyer puts in an amount lower than the purchase price for their appraisal contingency? I would guess probably less than 1%. Okay, so, and who knows, maybe a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1%. But we have this whole paragraph in here. Now, when this first came out, when they first redid the counteroffer, agents were calling me, what does this mean? People were calling me, oh my gosh, I put this in Chat GPT and I asked it to simplify the verbiage because it was so confusing. And I read it and then I stopped and I thought, okay, hold on. I'm going to read it again in a few hours to make sure that I'm getting it right, because I'm very particular about making sure that I have a clear understanding as a broker giving advice to hundreds of agents. So now what they've done is they've added these examples and they're saying, yeah, if the appraisal contingency amount is less than the sales price, well, you've created something called an appraisal gap. So they're now making up new terms, this is just making more work and headache just for the sake of making it. And then it says, by the way, since there's that new appraisal gap that you create, this fraction of buyers out there, if the purchase price changes over the course of the transaction, well, that appraisal gap, it remains the same and you just factor it into the new purchase price. It's like, I mean, it's so ridiculous. So you could leave 1A, 1B, and I'd be fine with it. 1C is so silly. And what's even more infuriating about this is that this is a counteroffer, okay? All you need is this in a counteroffer. That's it. You put this up here, okay, this section. You add this section beneath it. Make this like 10 or 15 or 20 lines. and then you have people sign at the bottom. Pretty simple. And I'll show you, once upon a time, California Association of Realtors knew this, because if I go to their store, I'm going to pull this over here. This is dated 11/14, okay? Now, even this was a bit wordy. Even this was poor usage of space on a form. But look, okay, you have the top section, identifying the transaction, the parties. You have other terms. Look at all this wonderful space. And even back then, people used the text overflow addendum all the time. Why? Because this wasn't enough space. So even then, with this area here, there wasn't enough space. You would think that would be the most critical part. Do we have enough space for agents to write the terms that they're countering out of a purchase agreement? After all, that's kind of the entire purpose of a counteroffer, not to make up new rules and explain, hey, remember that 15-page RPA you just went through? Yeah, well, here's some afterthoughts about it. And so they're going to put it on this counteroffer like, oh yeah, that's right, that one thing in that one paragraph. Oh yeah, and 3L2, let me go back and read that. It's like, I mean, it's so absurd. So then they have this section down here, and they mean it to be helpful, but it's just silly. They're saying, here's some other documents out of the 5,000 forms in the car library that we can attach on. Here, these all are different addenda that you can add in case one of these scenarios pertains to your transaction, okay? Whatever, forgivable if there was more space for their terms. And then you have the expiration down here. Okay, fine. Then another disclaimer, marketing to other buyers. All right. So ultimately, this is garbage. And this section here should be taking up this entire space. And this needs to be boiled down into more succinct verbiage, because agents need space to write the terms they're countering. They don't want to read a book about all these neurotic inconsistencies that whoever's creating these forms is dreaming up. All right, I think that's it. Form's pretty simple. At the end of the day, you put in other terms and you sign at the bottom. Thank you for listening to my rant. I hope you found it helpful. If you have questions, please leave a comment. Thank you.